So, hey guys, great to have you here and to kind of wrap up on our project and talk about static sites. And I think rather than talking too much about what's going on, let's kind of jump into the conversation. And can you tell me, what guys, what is a static site? What makes it different from other types of sites?
So when you are referring to a static site in the development world, usually what you're talking about is HTML that instead of being generated on the fly by the server, when a request hits the application, it's all pre-generated into static HTML files, which then require no scripting or backend languages to process. The web server can just serve the request up from the generated HTML file.
And what's the advantage of building a site that way?
There's a few advantages worth mentioning. I think first and foremost, the site's going to be really fast because there's no backend language or processing, and it's just a file. The site's going to be very, very responsive, very low time to first byte. Another benefit as well would be you're no longer having to deal with a lot of the typical security issues that you may have on a site like WordPress, or anytime there's user input and a back end, there's potential for vulnerabilities. And with the static site, if it's hosted properly, there's essentially zero risk in terms of being hacked or having the site taken over.
And Victor, as you were working on the project, you were kind of comparing it to the WordPress site. Did you notice those advantages, those differences like speed and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, speed, there's no question. But one of the biggest things I've noticed is never been a huge fan of the source code for WordPress, how they've just got all the different possible editors and plugins and extensions. And so the source code kind of turns into spaghetti, and it's not the easiest to go back and make revisions to later, especially if you want something custom done. So it was really nice to be able to just simplify everything and bring it in and make it a lot easier to work with both now and in the future.
And I guess mainly, William, you're the one that sort of decided to go down the path of the static site and to switch from WordPress to the static site. Why did you think that was right for Razoyo's website? What made you feel like that was the right decision?
I just think that it keeps things cleaner in a lot of ways. WordPress, a lot of people will run sites, primarily content sites, off of WordPress, and there's a lot of disadvantages that come along with it. You're now having to keep your WordPress upgraded, ensure that all of your plugins are upgraded all the time as well. Any upgrade obviously has the potential to break something. You've got, content creators that are not necessarily developers going in and installing new plugins, creating different WYSIWYG editors. And basically, over time, what I've found is that it just leads to a bit of a mess. And really, if the goal is just to be able to display content, a static site generator is built with that primary goal in mind. Some of the added benefits as well, being that there's no plugins or any backend language or platform to manage. It's really just everything. It becomes very simple when you can eliminate all of those things. Templates are very easy to update from a developer point of view. Most static site generators accept content in a variety of formats, and they all have ways to integrate content from more dynamic like services. And so I just felt that to avoid having to deal with the headaches of running and hosting WordPress, and having everything funnel through version control, just made sense. And I think the overall health and longevity of the code for the site is going to be better and longer going this route as opposed to WordPress.
Okay. Yeah, and Victor, you saw some of that, right? When you were moving the data over, you saw that there were several different editors, and they all kind of coded the pages differently, and that led to some discrepancies in the formatting and even the styling of the site. Because I think we started with the WordPress editor, and then we added a plugin called Fusion Editor, and then we switched to Gutenberg. So are the things that William is saying about kind of how the site really became a little bit bulky and confusing? You saw that as well as you were looking through the code and transferring things over?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been working with HTML, CSS for a while now. I'm pretty comfortable, but it was messy for sure starting out. It was a process, but it's kind of like, cleaning out the closet. You put it off forever, and you don't want to do it, but then you finally do it, and it's like, wow, this is so much better. So I think it was the right move, even though it created a little bit more work up front.
Right. And part of that decision, so let's talk about plugins for a second. One of the things, I guess there were kind of two key plugins that we used a lot other than sort of just the theme-based stuff. And it seemed to me that a lot of the plugins really just sort of helped us work around some of the weaknesses in the WordPress architecture. But two of them I think are widely used. And one is Akismet, which helps to avoid spam, like comment spam and so forth on blog pages. And the second one was an SEO plugin that, and I can't remember the name of it now, but
Yoast, probably.
Yoast, thank you, Yoast, right? And that's kind of a pretty useful tool for content developers. And so, as we look at, well, how do you manage content in the site? How do you make sure that those two considerations, the spamming of comments and so forth, and then also the help that you get from Yoast for SEO, how are we going to manage that and manage content on the new site so that we don't have to kind of go back to just whoever's counting on whoever is managing content to know the rules and track word counts and make sure that they don't have too many passive sentences and things like that?
Well, so the answer to the first is pretty straightforward. There are no comments on a static site, so you don't have to worry about comment spam. That being said, if you do want comments on a static site, it really comes down to using the right tool for the job. And I know that there are services out there that allow you to integrate some sort of a third-party commenting engine into your posts or your pages, and that would work nicely on a static site. And if you are using one of those services, comment moderation is normally part of the package there.
Sure. And let's talk about content. So Victor, the old content, you just moved over and they're essentially markdown files. Is that
right?
Correct? Right.
Yeah. Like we have been saying previously on WordPress, we were using third-party content management tools to create content for WordPress or a number of different things. But the good thing about a static site, and especially Hugo, is that we can now do that all within Hugo as markdown files, which are a lot simpler. You're not asking your marketing person to come in and know HTML or CSS. Markdown is very clean, straightforward. So it allows us to just make everything, more uniform and a lot easier to work with.
Right. And so we'll talk about a little bit more about Hugo in just a second, but basically, moving and creating content as a developer, it's very easy because you can do it in these markdown files. The files are actually checked into a repository. and you can do all the wonderful things you can do with Git, like version control and tracking and notifications and all those things, right? But then that's not our long-term plan, right? Like after our new content is going to be coming from a content management API-based content management system. Am I right about that?
Yes, you're right about that. But again, what makes that easy is we know we're converting everything to Markdown. So, if we're writing something in a third-party software, we can pull it in via API and just convert it to Markdown. So it's pretty simple.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on to the process. So from a developer perspective, what is the process of building the site? Victor, you mentioned Hugo. You want to tell us a little bit about what Hugo is and how that kind of defined the way that we created the site?
Yeah, so Hugo is it's a static site generator that was designed by Google, I believe, and it leverages some more modern technology on the back end so that it can basically compile all of the code, super optimize it, so that you have these really fast load times. And the cool thing about Hugo, I really got an opportunity to dive into some of its features, and it actually has a pretty robust content management system built in. So it's not like they're just throwing you in and saying, hey, create HTML, CSS, Markdown. Now there's actually a lot of tools to help you design full websites very easily. So it was a lot of fun to play with those tools. Hopefully in the future, we'll get to spend some more time with it and see what else we can do. But Hugo is very powerful.
Okay. And what was the process of moving from the WordPress static site? How did that go? What problems did we overcome, and how did we overcome those as we did that?
Yeah, I think personally, a few of the largest challenges that stood out initially was how do we get all of our images, because we had over 100 blog posts. So we had to pull in each one of those blog posts, convert them from their messy HTML into clean Markdown. And we also had to go and retrieve all of our images that were being hosted somewhere else, download them, pull them into local repositories that were relative to their respective blog posts. So there was definitely some things to think through, but we were able to put together some pretty robust scripts to take care of the job. But that was definitely one that I scratched my head for a little bit about how to do.
Yeah, I think so. When it comes to moving to a static site generator like Hugo, you're going to need to do two things. Primarily, you need to migrate over your theme, and then you need to migrate over your content. Migrating the theme, I think anybody would probably agree that it's pretty straightforward in a static site generator through the use of templates, blocks, and nesting. You can very simply build out whatever layout you want. We happen to base ours off of the Bulma CSS framework, but you can pretty much use any kind of CSS framework that's out there. In regards to moving the content, that's where things get a little tricky. We have all of these posts that live inside of WordPress tables, and the content within them has a variety of tags that are coming from some of the WYSIWYG plugins that were added. So in terms of migrating the content, it's just a matter of exporting those from the table and then being able to either manually or through a script scrub the content itself and put them in a cleaner, static site generator friendly format, which we decided to do with a script that Victor worked on. And yeah, he basically had to cleanse the data coming out of WordPress and then write it to the content files for the static site generator.
So lots of grep.
Yes,
lots of grep,
regular
and
regular expressions. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So let's talk about the future of the site. what are our future plans? What are some things that you would like to add to what we've done, or that we should be looking to do in the future on the website?
Yeah, well, I'll kick that off. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I've got some exciting ideas, but I think we all in agreement that it might be nice to build out more of an about us that can feature our team, because personally, I'm fairly new with Razoyo, and in my opinion, that is one of our strongest elements, is our team and just the characters and the personalities we have. So it'd be great to kind of show that off on our about us a little bit.
Okay. From content perspective, William, anything from a technical perspective? I know you've been kind of looking down the road on this, and what are your plans on architecture?
Really just layering in some of the dynamic functionality over time. As an example, we will be hooking it into an external content management system. So there's that integration that is in the near future, coming up in the near future. I'd also like to integrate into search, some sort of a search service. With the static site generator, you don't really have the ability to do dynamic searching. And so a way to do that is to tie into a third-party service and basically have them index your content, and then you can just drop in their search. A lot of them have pre-built search functionality that you can just drop in, and it connects to their indexes. So search is another one. Other than that, it's really just just coming up with an ecosystem of little widgets that are uniform on the site, just to make the content creators' lives easier. The more we can build out in terms of widgets that they can use, the better and more complex the content can look like, and and still remain uniform and clean, because everything is centralized. So I think those are the big things coming up.
Okay, and we do have a little bit of e-commerce on our site. We have some services, and I know we've integrated with BigCommerce to actually run the cart on those with the Hugo. But do you think in general static sites are good candidates for e-commerce applications, or are they really just good for like general content management?
Generally, you're not going to want to use a static site for e-commerce. There's a few things you could do to make something like that work. There are a lot of e-commerce solutions that are back-end or API only, and you could certainly work with a middleware, or maybe even directly with one of those if they have some JavaScript implementations to pull those into your static site. Or in our case, we just have a small handful of products that we sell, and so we basically just send the user to BigCommerce when it's time to check out and collect payment. So you have options, but you probably are not going to want to use a static site generator as a full-fledged e-commerce solution.
How about with any sort of headless applications? Does a static site have a role there?
Well, the static site would be the headless part. So a static site is headless, and so you could use it to power. As long as you have a backend to connect to, the sky's the limit in terms of what dynamic capabilities you can add to it. But technically speaking, a static site is headless. It doesn't have any kind of a backend built into it. It just connects to other services. So,
right. And I know, so we use an open source marketing automation system, and Victor, I think you did the integration there called Mautic.
Yeah.
How did that go? Was that a relatively smooth and any system set up for you?
Yeah, it was. I don't have experience with a bunch, but I'm sure they're similar to Mautic in that most of them, for instance, you can embed it into your website as a JavaScript, And then within Mautic, when you're designing that form or the element that you're going to embed, they give you the option to add tags or class tags for styling. So you just design a rough draft of your form, you can embed it via script, and then from there you can use your CSS to style it however you'd like. So it was definitely pretty straightforward, and we're using several Mautic forms on our website.
Okay. So let's move on. We're about at time here, but what sort of applications would you recommend using a static site for? And what kind of advice do you have for developers who are looking to implement a static site? And maybe both of you can answer that one.
I would tend to lean towards using a static site generator for any kind of application that makes sense. If you can avoid having to pull in some sort of a dynamic platform, then I would always opt for using a static site generator for the reasons that we discussed earlier. Really, the question is not when to use one. The question would be, can I use one in this particular use case? And I think that if the use case matches, then it's always a yes. Like I would go ahead and use one. And then let's see, what was the other question there that you asked?
What advice do you have for developers wanting to implement? But I think you kind of answered that, right? It's, you got to look for the use case as, and not in a general sense, but more the very specific use case, and to see if that makes sense. But you kind of would favor a static site just because of the benefits we talked about before: ease of implementation, security, and just management of the site and the content, and styling is easier for developers, right?
Yeah, and the first step is just to pick. There's several static site generators out there. We went with the Go implementation called Hugo. So really, the first step is to research what options are out there and to pick one that matches your needs the most. And then from there, it's then it's just building.
Yeah. Victor, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the only thing I might add is just to elaborate on the use case of when it might make sense. Anytime you're looking to develop a website that doesn't heavily depend on dynamic content or data transfer or third-party modules, if it's relatively contained, then a static site is a great way to go, because speed, especially nowadays with the instant gratification of technology, people like speed, and it's going to increase your conversion rates for sure. So yeah, if you've got a relatively contained website, a static site would definitely be worth consideration.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks guys for your time, and I appreciate your comments on this. And I'm sure we'll be revisiting this in the future, but if anybody who's listening to this has questions about static sites, just please reach out to Razoyo, and we'd love to talk to you about it. Thanks again, guys.